With Silksong finally around the corner, I thought it was the perfect time to revisit the mysterious, tragic, and awe-inspiring world that started it all. If you've ever played Hollow Knight, you know that it's more than just a challenging Metroidvania. It's a story hidden behind whispers, broken ruins, and the remnants of a kingdom long past. Unlike many games that hand you their lore outright, Hollow Knight demands patience and curiosity. You piece together its history through fragments, cryptic dialogue, scattered relics, and the dreams of the dead. And when it all comes together, what you find is one of the most beautifully tragic tales in gaming. So today we're going to take a deep dive into the definitive explanation of Hollow Knight's lore. We'll cover the rise and fall of Hallownest, the forces of light and the void that shaped it, the creation of the Hollow Knight himself, and the events that led to the infection that consumed the kingdom. This video is going to be detailed, a guide not just for newcomers, but for anyone who wants to truly understand the story behind one of the greatest indie games ever made. Long before Hallownest became the kingdom we explore in Hollow Knight, the land was home to countless insect tribes, primitive, instinct-driven, and scattered across the caverns. Among them were the moths, who worshipped a higher being of light known as the Radiance. She wasn't just a god to them, she was their very source of dreams and consciousness. Through her, they found purpose. But everything began to change with the arrival of another force, the Pale King. Unlike the Radiance, who represented the brilliance of light and memory, the Pale King was born of something much older, a worm, and worms were colossal ancient beings that tunneled through the earth, embodiments of power and inevitability. When one such worm shed its old form and was reborn as the Pale King, it took on a smaller insect-like body, yet carried with it the wisdom and authority of something eternal. The Pale King promised something no other being could, higher thought. He offered insects the ability to break free from instinct, to grow minds of their own, and to build a kingdom that would stand as a beacon of civilization underground. Slowly, tribes from all across the land bent the knee, abandoning their old ways, their old gods, and uniting under the Pale King's dream. Even the moths, who had once worshipped the Radiance as their deity, turned away from her and pledged themselves to the Pale King. Their memory of her dimmed, her influence weakened, and her radiance, once blinding, began to fade into obscurity. But a god forgotten does not simply vanish. The Radiance lingered in the dream realm, watching, waiting, and growing bitter as her followers abandoned her light. It was here that the seeds of Hallownest's tragedy were planted. The Pale King's kingdom would rise, glorious and strong, but it would be built upon the silenced power of a forgotten god, and in time, the Radiance would seek to remind Hallownest that she had not been erased so easily. As Hallownest flourished under the Pale King, its cities grew into marvels of architecture and order. Insects who once crawled in darkness now lived with thought, ambition, and purpose. But the Pale King knew something his subjects did not. The Radiance was not gone. Though forgotten by most, her presence still lingered, seeping back into the dreams of those who once worshipped her. The Pale King understood this very danger. If the Radiance were allowed to return, she would consume the minds of his kingdom, twisting dreams into a plague of infection. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat to everything he had built. And so the Pale King conceived of a desperate plan, to create beings of pure void, empty of will and thought, who could serve as vessels to contain her power. Deep beneath Hallownest lies the Abyss, a chasm filled with swirling darkness, the primal void itself. It was here that the Pale King and the White Lady attempted their great experiment. From the union of their essence and the void, countless children were born. They were fragile, crawling figures birthed only to climb desperately toward the surface. Many fell back into the abyss, never to arise again. These creatures became known as the Vessels. They were unique because they were hollow, beings without true mind or self. Their emptiness was paradoxical, and it made them perfect containers. If the Radiance could be sealed within one of them, she would have no will to corrupt, no consciousness to fight against. But not all vessels were equal. Among the many cast aside, one stood above the rest, chosen for being the most pure. This being would come to be known as the Hollow Knight. The Pale King took it, raised it in secrecy, and prepared it for the role that would define Hallownest's fate. Still, even with this plan, the Pale King knew the seal would require more than a vessel. To bind the Radiance, three beings of great power would have to willingly give up their lives, entering an eternal sleep to keep the prison intact. These three became the Dreamers. Monomon the Teacher, Lurien the Watcher, and Hera the Beast. Each represented a corner of Hallownest's strength, and each sacrificed everything to uphold the Pale King's vision. Thus, the Black Egg Temple was created. At its heart lay the Hollow Knight, chained and sealed away, with the Radiance imprisoned inside. The Dreamers took their eternal slumber, and Hallownest seemed saved. But this salvation came at a terrible cost. A kingdom built on sacrifice and silence cannot hold out forever, and in time the cracks began to show. For a time, Hallownest thrived. The Hollow Knight had been sealed in the Black Egg, the Radiance imprisoned within it, and the Dreamers slumbered to maintain the bonds. On the surface, the kingdom seemed untouchable. Vast cities, gleaming palaces, even deep mines and sprawling waterways that stretched the land's reach. But the Radiance was not so easily contained. Gods, after all, do not die quietly. Though trapped within the Hollow Knight, her light leaked outward, whispering once more into the dreams of insects. Slowly, her influence spread as an orange-tinted sickness, the infection. The infection was not simply a disease of the body, it was a sickness of the mind, seizing insects' will, replacing thought with Radiance burning influence. Once inhabited towns fell silent, their residents reduced to husks, shells of their former selves, endlessly repeating broken memories and instinct. Where there had once been ambition and higher thought, there was now only Radiance's glow. The Pale King, once revered, grew desperate. He withdrew into his palace, sealing off the White Palace from most of his people. Efforts to contain the spread failed, and what was once a kingdom united in pride fractured into scattered remnants. Warriors and scholars alike fell to the infection. Even the Hollow Knight, the perfect vessel, was not flawless. Though chosen for its purity, the Hollow Knight still carried a spark of attachment, a faint sense of self that should never have existed. That imperfection allowed the Radiance to leak through, undermining the Pale King's grand design. What was meant to be eternal containment became only a fragile barrier. As the years dragged on, Hallownest collapsed in silence. Whole tribes were wiped away. Vast structures like the City of Tears and the Kingdom's Edge became ruins haunted by infected husks. The Dreamers still slept, guarding by the seal, but their sacrifice bought only time. When the dust settled, all that remained was a fallen kingdom, its once glorious halls echoing with nothing but the Radiance's infection, spreading and waiting for the next chapter to unfold. From the ruins of Hallownest silence comes a new wanderer, the Night. Small, quiet, and seemingly insignificant, the Night descends into the kingdom long after its collapse. But this little figure is far more than it seems. Like the Hollow Knight itself, the Night is one of the many vessels born into the abyss, a child of void, created for the very purpose of containing the Radiance. Unlike the Hollow Knight, however, this vessel survived the fall, forgotten until now. As the Night explores Hallownest, it discovers the remnants of what once was, vast cities drowned in endless rain, infected minds overrun with Radiance's glow, and fading guardians who cling to memories of a dead kingdom. Every encounter, from fierce warriors to broken dreamers, pulls the Night deeper into the truth of Hallownest's fall. To face the Radiance, the Night must first release the Dreamers from their eternal sleep. Each Dreamer, Monomon the Teacher, Lurien the Watcher, and Hera the Beast, serve as a living lock on the Black Egg Temple. Their bodies and spirits were bound to maintain the prison, and the Night's task is to break those bonds. Doing so is not an act of cruelty, but of necessity, for only then can the seal be broken and the Radiance confronted directly. Along the way, the Night uncovers more than just the mechanics of the seal. Through relics, whispers, and the Dream Nail, the Night learns of the Pale King's desperate plan, the suffering of the vessels in the abyss, and the truth of its own existence. The revelation is stark. The Night is not a random wanderer, but one of many discarded children, now risen from the shadows to complete the work that the Hollow Knight could not. At last, with the Dreamers gone and the Black Egg Temple open, the Night faces the Hollow Knight itself. What was once the Pale King's chosen vessel now thrashes in agony, consumed by Radiance's infection. The battle is not simply against a foe, but against the failure of the Pale King's design. And here the player encounters one of Hollow Knight's most fascinating aspects in its multiple endings. Depending on choices made along the journey, whether the Knight accepts help, whether it embraces its own nature, the fate of Hallownest shifts. But every ending circles back to the same core truths. The Radiance must be faced, and only the Void can oppose her light. The confrontation with the Hollow Knight is the culmination of the entire journey, but what happens afterward depends on the choices made throughout the game, obviously. Hollow Knight offers several endings, each painting a different outcome for the kingdom and the knight itself. In the default ending, the knight defeats the Hollow Knight and takes its place as the new vessel. The Radiance remains sealed, but the cycle continues. Hallownest gains no freedom, it is simply a changing of the guard, and the knight becomes the new Hollow Knight, bound inside the black egg, maintaining the same fragile seal. It is a bittersweet resolution, victory at the cost of self, and no true salvation for the kingdom. But there's another path. With the help of the Dreamnail and the Void Heart, the knight can go beyond simply replacing its sibling. In the Sealed Siblings ending, the knight and the Hollow Knight fight together against the Radiance. Though they manage to suppress her once more, it is only a temporary solution. The kingdom remains chained to the cycle of containment. Now the most definitive ending, however, is the Dream No More ending. In this path, the knight uses the Dreamnail to enter the Hollow Knight's mind and confront the Radiance directly. Here, the Void itself rises up, aided by the many vessels who were cast into the abyss long ago, and together they overwhelm the Radiance, dragging her down into the darkness. For the first time, her binding light is extinguished, not just suppressed, and the infection dissolves and Hallownest is finally freed from her grasp. This ending represents the true resolution of the Pale King's desperate gamble. Though he sought to silence the Radiance through emptiness, it was not purity that achieved victory, it was unity. The knight, embracing its nature as a vessel of void, succeeded where the Hollow Knight failed, not by being empty, but by carrying the weight of choice, struggle, and connection. The Radiance's fall closes the book on Hallownest's tragedy, but it leaves behind a haunting message. Even gods can be forgotten, and even the brightest light can be smothered by shadow, yet the cost is immense. The knight's fate and the fate of the many vessels is to disappear into that same darkness, never celebrated, never remembered, but victorious nonetheless. You see, what makes Hollow Knight so enduring isn't just its combat, its art style, or even its world design. It's the way its lore weaves together themes of sacrifice, memory, and the struggle between light and darkness. At its core, Hallownest's story is about cycles. The cycle of kingdoms rising and falling, of gods being worshipped and forgotten, of sacrifices being made in the hope of lasting salvation. The Radiance embodies memory and clinging to the past. She is a god who cannot let go, whose light burns away free thought in the name of devotion. And the Pale King represents ambition and progress, but his kingdom was built on silence, repression, and the suffering of countless vessels. Both forces, Radiance and Pale King, light and order, are flawed, and neither can endure. Our little knight stands in contrast. Born of the void, abandoned as useless, it is a being defined by absence, yet through its journey it finds purpose. Where the Hollow Knight failed because of its so-called purity, the knight succeeds precisely because it carries traces of self, of will, and of choice. The message is powerful. Emptiness alone is not strength, but sacrifice with awareness can bring true change. The themes of forgotten gods is equally as thought-provoking. The Radiance's downfall is not just a battle, it is the inevitable result of a deity who worshippers turned away. The moths abandoned her, and in their silence she faded. Hollow Knight reminds us that even divine beings are not eternal. They exist only as long as they are remembered. And finally, there is the tragic beauty of Hallownest itself. Every corner of the map, every broken statue, every whisper of dialogue is a testament to a kingdom that dreamed too big and fell under the weight of its own flaws. Yet in that silence, a story of resilience emerges. The knight's journey is not about restoring what was, but about ending the cycle so something new might eventually arise. As we look forward to Silksong, we carry this legacy with us. Team Cherry has crafted a world where endings are never final, and every choice resonates in the shadows. The fall of Hallownest is not the end of the story, but the foundation for what comes next. And so, when you set down the controller after defeating the Radiance, you don't just close the book on a game. You carry with you the weight of a kingdom's tragedy, the echo of the sacrifices remembered, and the reminder that even in emptiness, meaning can be found. That is the story and meaning behind Hollow Knight. And so that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the lore of Hollow Knight. From the rise of the Pale King to the bitter fall of Hallownest, from the Radiance's grip to the sacrifice of the vessels, this story is one of the most haunting and beautifully told in all of gaming. What makes it truly special is how much of it is left for the player to uncover. Hollow Knight doesn't hand you answers, it gives you fragments and trusts you to connect them. Every player's understanding is shaped by the path they take, the characters they meet, and the way they interpret what they see. That's why discussions around this game never really end, and there's always another perspective and another layer of meaning waiting to be unearthed. With Silksong right around the corner, I'm super excited. We stand at the edge of something new. Hornet's story will no doubt reveal more about the world Team Cherry has created, expanding on the mysteries we've only begun to understand, but no matter what comes next, the tragedy of Hallownest will remain one of the greatest tales ever told in the indie game world. So if you enjoyed this deep dive and want more content like this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what part of Hollow Knight's story resonated with you the most. Was it the Pale King's desperate gamble, the Hollow Knight's tragic fate, or the knight's final act of sacrifice? Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm working on a platinum guide for this game. It's very brutal, but I'm having a ton of fun, and I'll see you guys in Silksong for sure. We only got a few more days here. I'm super excited, so let's go.